All right, so my name is Ashley Davenport, and today I'm going to do my presentation over Robert Schumann, entitled A Descent into Insanity. Okay, so Robert Schumann was a brilliant romantic composer. However, during his lifetime, he suffered from a huge mental decline. There are a lot of theories as to why this happened. It's possibly related to events in his life that we'll discuss later, possibly a medical condition, and then also possibly a medical health disorder. In order to demonstrate this mental decline, we're going to talk about the Ghost Variations, which is the last piece that he wrote. And in the middle of this piece, he actually had a psychotic break, and then was later put into a mental institution. So we're going to compare the theme and variation 5. So a little bit about Robert Schumann. He was born June 8, 1810, and he died on July 29, 1856. He was born in Germany, and his parents were August Schumann and Joanna Schumann. In 1817, he started taking piano lessons at age 7. His teacher was Johann Kunst, and he also at this time started learning composition. However, he did not take lessons or get taught any of that. He just started experimenting with it by himself. He was also a writer, and he wrote 2 books titled Advice to Young Musicians and On Music and Musicians. And this kind of stems from his father, was also really into literature. In 1826, his sister, Emily Schumann, committed suicide. And then in the same month, his father passed away. So this was a big time of depression for him. And with the inheritance that he would have gotten from his father, he had to go to law school. That was a stipulation of it. So his mother sent him to law school at the University of Leipzig. While he was a law student, he also took piano lessons from Friedrich Wick. After a year of being there, he transferred to Heidelberg in 1829, and here it was where he decided that he really wanted to be a virtuoso pianist. So he convinced his mom to let him be a music student. So then he went back to the University of Leipzig in 1830. Unfortunately, he suffered a hand injury at this point, so he was completely numb in a couple of his fingers, which really hindered his piano playing. So he kind of had to put that aside. But he also met his future wife, Clara Wick, here, which was the daughter of his piano professor. Okay, so a bit about Clara Schumann. She herself was a piano virtuoso, and she was also a composer. Her father was Friedrich Wick, and actually when Schumann decided that he wanted to marry her, he got into a lawsuit with her father. Eventually, when they won that and it kind of went to the side, they got married in 1840, and this year is known as the Year of Song. It was a big composition year for both of them. Schumann developed a lot of bad habits, smoking and drinking. That came when he was in Heidelberg, actually. He used to have competitions to outdrink his professor, who was supposed to be his mentor. He also experienced a lot of manic behavior, a lot of anxiety and deep depression, and then he contemplated and attempted suicide a couple of different times. And in 1854, he expressed a desire to be put in a mental institution, and Clara at first did not want to do that, but she ended up letting him do that later on. So, Ghost Variations. This is a theme and 5 variations, and it was originally hidden by Clara. She was terrified that people would discover it and his madness. And actually, the theme by itself was published in 1894, so 2 years before she died. He wrote the Ghost Variations in 1854, February, and during this time period, he said that he was hearing angels and demons. The demons took the voices of tigers and hyena. So actually, between Variation 4 and Variation 5, he attempted suicide in the Rhine River. He went down and threw his ring in the river, and then followed it, but was fished out by fishermen, so that didn't work out. And then he was put into Endenich, which is the mental institution, where he was unable to have visitors until he died, and then he died 2 years later. So an overview. It was originally titled Theme and Variations in E-flat major. Each variation includes 29 measures and is in a binary form, so an A and B section. There are 4-bar phrases in this piece, and the complete work was not published until 1939, when it was actually like rediscovered. Okay, so this is the theme. You can kind of see how it's pretty straightforward. We're gonna see if we can play this. Right, so this is written in E flat major. It's pretty straightforward, and it kind of coincides with the fact that Schumann said that he was hearing angels as he was writing this. It's very church and hymn-like, very subtle. It utilizes this pedal tone, which is kind of just an E flat that he has going in the bottom there. Whereas on the top, he has a whole like chord progression. It makes sense, it's pretty concise. It starts with a tonic chord, then moves to a 2, then a 4, then a 1, and holds on to that for a little while, and then repeats in the next 2 measures. The only note that can't be explained by this chord progression is the F right here in this measure. And it's a little untraditional, but we think it's a passing tone in that it goes from the G, the F for 2 beats, and then stops on the E in the next measure. So we're going to listen to that one more time just to compare it. So remember that because it'll be useful in a minute. Oh, and it also ends on an imperfect authentic cadence. So variations 1 through 4, so a little overview on these. In variation 1, the melody remains. It's pretty traditional, but there's an introduction of the triplet rhythm in the bass. Variation 2, the melody remains again, but it's written in a canon, so it begins in the treble clef and then follows with the bass clef. Variation 3, the melody is actually in the bass, and a 16th note rhythm is introduced in the treble. And then in variation 4, the melody remains, but it switches voices. And this is also the only one that's in a minor key. Okay, so this already looks completely different from the theme. So in that, you can hear there's a lot of strange and different sounds going on in there, and then the melody is also not necessarily as recognizable. So again, we have the hint of that pedal tone as was in the theme. We have a little bit of a resemblance of that same chord progression that he has going on. Also, this is the pickup in the first 2 measures. But there's also a hint that this piece could be polytonal. There's a lot of underlying D major things. So there's not any in the pickup note. However, in the actually first measure, there's a lot of hints that there's a 2 chord in there in D major. And then in the second measure, there's the outline of the 4 chord. All right, so this is the 3rd and 4th measure. Again, there's that pedal tone. Then the thing here that is different is the 7 chord. That was not in the theme originally. And then there's more of that D major chord that's underlying there with the 5 and the 1. And the evidence that the biggest concrete evidence for the D major under there is that this is probably the most traditional chord progression you can have, and that it goes 2, 4, 5, and then 1. So Robert Schumann was a brilliant German composer of the Romantic era. He suffered from a great mental decline, heard voices of angels, tigers, hyenas, and I think that is definitely reflected in the piece that we just looked at. Whereas there's minute changes to variations 1 through 4, but then after his suicide attempt, there's a massive change to variation 5. Special thanks to my mentor for this project, Dr. Heather Hawk, and that is all.